Today I'd like to share a little safety information about grain bin safety and anhydrous ammonia safety. These are two areas where farmers face a lot of risk. And I have 37 years of experience working in agribusiness safety, and thought it might benefit some of you to see this. And even if you don't have grain bins on your farm, and even if you're not involved and don't use anhydrous ammonia, I still think it's good for you to hear this information as you live in a community where there's a lot of this going on, and you have certainly friends, relatives that are involved in this stuff, and I still think it's valuable information to have. On the grain bin side, we don't get our news the way we used to, so it's not in the headlines like it used to be. I think you can remember back, you'd see local reports on your news stations. There were national articles written that we would see and read, and now we're just fed our news a little differently, but they're still happening. I just want to make that clear. It's still happening out there. In fact, the numbers are up, and I'm going to show some numbers that show that. This is just one of those sites that you see at a bin when there's someone trapped inside, and unfortunately, more often than not, these are actually recoveries, not rescues. This picture kind of speaks for itself. This is some of the data that I mentioned earlier, and again, I'm not going to flood you with this, but just to show you that actually our engulfments are increasing. This is from the period of time 2011 to 2022, and we're up quite a bit actually even from last year, but we're actually the most that have been recorded. And I could say that most of the incidents that happen on the farm are not reported. So I think the number is actually much, much greater than this. Unfortunately, Iowa leads in the number of cases of grain entrapments, with 9 in 2022 and 177 during that time frame from 2011 to 2022. Unfortunately, this is one of those cases that occurred. This happened to Nocheaton in 2011, and Corey Wingate was the outside grain superintendent for the co-op there, and he went in early to get a head start. They were emptying the grain stadium outside, and this one was pretty well set up. It had a reclaim system underneath the asphalt pad, and Corey went in early. He got an early start, and when the rest of the crew showed up later, Corey was nowhere to be found. And unfortunately, they did find his body. His leg was actually in the transition between that stadium and the reclaim system. Corey was 37-year-old, very active in his community, volunteer fireman, EMT, vice president of the Catfish Club, very well respected in the community, very hard worker, and he left behind a wife and 2 young children. Very tragic. This is just the stadium where Corey passed, and those are 4x8 sheets of plywood you see there circled with that red circle. Those were used as a cofferdam to hold back the grain so they could recover Corey's body. On a brighter note, now I'm going to actually talk about someone who was recovered from being buried in grain. This is Eric Baker's story. This happened, I think, in about 2013, 2014. Eric was actually buried in grain, but he had a mask on that he and his dad had bought at like a farm show, and they just picked it up to help with dust and things, and it actually had a little forced air fan in the back that just forced air around this mask, and he was able to keep from suffocating in the grain for the 4.5 hours he was submerged while the rescue team got him out. There's also an ABC TV show that was done kind of recreating Eric's story. It was done in 2015. It's called In an Instant. I think you could probably Google search and find that one as well if you wanted to look at that. I'm going to show a short five-minute video of Eric telling his story in his own words. He and I shared the podium at a few safety meetings in the past. This was actually a PAS meeting that he and I did a few years ago.
South of Iowa Falls, when one move changed everything. Stephanie Moore has the story. It's new tonight at 10.
Eric Baker and his father were emptying an 80,000 bushel bin full of moldy corn. Baker stood inside the bin using a pipe to break up the rotten corn when a large air pocket collapsed under him.
I was scared. It's a really strange feeling. I mean, I've never been in quicksand, but I would imagine it'd be the same thing. I mean, it just feels like corn is just crawling up your leg and just sucking you in.
Baker suffered from asthma as a child, so when working around the dusty corn, he wears a battery-powered ventilation system. And that system...
That's how I was able to survive. That's the only reason I'm alive, actually.
After an hour, Baker felt a tug on the rope tied around his arm. The rope pulled loose, letting the man pulling it know that Baker was trapped inside.
And the reason I heard him was one of their radios came back, like someone was talking through one of their radios, and they came back and they said, you know, if that kid's in here, he must be dead because I don't hear him or see him. So when I heard that, I just started screaming just as loud as I could.
All of a sudden, they had, hey, he's talking to us. You know, and it's just like that, all of a sudden it goes from, you know, okay, it's going to be a recovery mode to, okay, it's going to be a rescue mode.
The rescue workers soon uncovered Baker's hand, and crews started a plan to relieve the nearly 900 pounds of pressure pushing on his body.
We cut relief holes in the sides of the grain bin on all four sides, started pulling the grain out. We had 8 to 10 to 12 guys on every hole scooping grain. Nearly
5 hours later, Baker was freed.
When that happened, they pulled my feet out, and there was a guy with me the whole time, and he's the one that actually pulled me out. When that happened, I just collapsed and just started uncontrollably bawling in his arms, just sobbing.
He was immediately life-flighted to the hospital, but Baker was able to walk away 48 hours later.
So went down 10:32 is what time I went down. The rescue crew arrived on site at 12:37. At 12:52 they found my hand. At 1:17 they found my face, and at 3:02 they pulled me out. So I kind of hang out and I'm like, well, just one more poke, and that poke broke the shelf. So when you're in a grain bin, you're like ankle deep or so in corn, just walking around, no problem. Well, I went from about ankle deep to being knee deep like that. I mean, I literally fell through the corn. At which point I looked down and I tried moving my legs, and I can see the corn literally crawling up my leg. No, I wasn't crawling, I was sinking. And when I was knee deep, you're unable to move. No matter what you do, you cannot move yourself. I had enough time to look around, and by this point I'm, you know, here-ish, and I had enough time to look around all around me, and at 360 degrees there was corn going down, and I was going down with it. Completely buried, completely black. And luckily, my dad shut the grain bin off when he did, because my right leg ended up being on top of the gearbox of the sweep. So I was in the very, very center of the grain bin. So I went down like this. That's how they found me. And my left leg was kind of just like I was trying to step out of the hole. And this much of this hand was only the thing visible. So my head at that point would have been about 2.5 feet under the corn. I mean, it'd be like standing in a wall. You can push like back, and you go back, I mean, maybe an inch, but the back you go, then corn just comes. I mean, you can't get away from it. That's the problem. If I would have panicked, I would have moved more, and the more I moved, the tighter it restricted me. So if I would have panicked, then I wouldn't be here. I mean, it's pretty simple. If I wasn't wearing that helmet, I wouldn't be here. My right foot would have been under about 900 pounds of pressure. After they took me out, I thought I was going to lose my right foot because it was squished. I mean, I was wearing steel-toed boots, and it was flat. Didn't, luckily, but my chest would have been under about 400 pounds of pressure. And so the whole time it was very, very difficult to breathe. I mean, the doctors told me if I would have been 5 years older, my heart would have exploded from how fast it was beating. 35 minutes after I got taken out, I got life-flighted. When I arrived in the hospital, my heart rate was 171 beats a minute. If any of you work out, that's pretty quick. They're guessing the entire time I was submerged, my heart rate was between 230 and 250 beats a minute. I'd probably say 98% of the time I thought about breathing. I mean, every breath was a struggle. I mean, 400 pounds of pressure. Yeah, when they actually got me out and like they got my head out, at first they just gave me a straight O2 line. I don't know if you've ever breathed out of those, it's not enjoyable. And then they actually tried to give me a rebreather mask, and you know, it has like the airbag that inflates up and deflates and everything. And my breaths were so shallow I couldn't use it because I wasn't pushing any air into it. So I'm in the emergency room there, and everyone doesn't really know what to do with me. They're just like, they really don't. They're taking my vitals and everything. They're like, so what are all these imprints on you? And after that, they noticed them, and for about the next 30 minutes, they took a pair of tweezers and literally picked corn out of my skin because the pressure was there so bad. It literally, I mean, I had indents like 1.5 inches, 2 inches in my skin just from the corn, and I mean, we're talking thousands of them.
Typically, with grain engulfments, the reason the person went in the bin in the first place was to deal with some grain quality issues. So if you can keep your grain quality high and detect any problems early before it becomes large clumps that don't flow, that's a good thing. Give some consideration to temperature cables or systems that would help with that. There's a lot of information available from all the land-grant universities. Iowa State has a lot of resources. There's also new technology available, CO2 monitoring systems that will monitor the carbon dioxide that's given off, and that'll be an indication of grain going out of condition, so you could catch it early and hopefully not have a situation where your reclaim system and your sump are plugging. There are 3 types of engulfments that happen in a grain bin. This is the flowing grain example, where the flowing grain just sucks you in. And as Eric explained, you know, once you're knee deep, you literally cannot pull yourself out of grain. The second type is the bridge grain, and that's the situation that Eric found himself in. And you've heard the stories of the federal grain inspector walking across and inspecting inventory levels and coming to the office and hearing that, oh, you know, that bin's empty. What are you talking about? It's full. And that's the kind of crust that can occur with a layer of spoiled grain that will literally support weight up to a point. And if you fall through it, you're basically instantly engulfed. And the last type is when you've got grain, you know, spoiled grain hanging on the wall, and you poke at it with a shovel or a stick, or it just falls on its own, and you can become engulfed instantly as well. Kind of along the same lines of prevention, sweep augers have gotten really robust and really good. I know they're expensive, but consider it in any new project certainly, and even with retrofits, consider spending some money and getting some really good zero entry sweeps with the tractor drives that you'd leave in there all the time, and I think you'll be very happy. Also, there are sump guards either available commercially, or you can actually build your own that help break up clumps, get rid of maybe some of the bean pods and corn stalks that might otherwise plug your sump. So consider that as well. There are also pieces you can retrofit into your sweep augers to help break those clumps up. And I know I've seen some of my YouTube, like the Larsons that I follow on YouTube, they have systems kind of built into their sumps to help with this as well. There's also a lot of farmer engineering out there. This is a great idea. This is in St. Ansgar. I saw this in a bin. It's just basically a pipe that goes to the outside of the bin, and they just throw a pipe wrench on it, and it swings these bars up to clear the debris out of the way of the auger if the sump is plugged. And there's always a trusty old standby drill with some rod on it that's kind of used to go in a small hole and clear a plug. Just briefly, too, I'll mention on the commercial side of the house, and some of you may have worked for a commercial grain facility. I have a lot of experience with this in my business. Very strict requirements on bin entry. You have to lock out the equipment, check the air quality, use a harness and lifeline, and then key to all of this is having an attendant monitor all the activity, make sure it's done safely. And boy, it'd be great if you farmers would adopt this type of an approach to your grain bin entry as well. It would certainly save lives and help with this situation greatly. The other thing I just wanted to mention briefly, a couple years ago, this silo feature film actually was produced and came out that literally puts the spotlight on grain bin and bin entrapment. And this is a fictional story, but it draws from a lot of true life experiences in grain bins and kind of the damage to family and community when something like this happens. So it's fairly interesting. And the last thing I wanted to mention is just general safety around your grain bins. They're not getting any younger. There is a lot of deterioration that occurs over time. This is a fairly typical thing I see with some of these old steel ladders on grain bins, is they kind of rust out from the inside. The galvanizing protects the outside, but they rust out from the inside, and these steps will get pretty weak. And just keep an eye on your facility and make sure that the physical, obvious fall hazards and things like that are taken care of. And just ladders. I see an awful lot of non-standard, non-approved, not good ladders out there in use at grain facilities in general. And also kind of watch for structural concerns. These grain bins are almost living, breathing things. When you fill them, if they're not loaded exactly correctly, or if you have side draws and you're drawing uneven, they can really shift and move. And I see a lot of sheared off anchor bolts and things kind of stiffeners and things kind of shifted out of place. So keep an eye on that. Make sure the structural integrity of your grain facilities are intact. That's going to be it for the grain side of this presentation. I'm going to shift gears now and talk briefly about anhydrous ammonia. Now we're going to talk a little bit about anhydrous ammonia, and it seemed like there was a lot of gas going on this fall, and I don't know of any specific instances, but I guarantee you there were accidents involving anhydrous ammonia. It's a very hazardous product, hazardous material. It's stored under pressure. It's transferred, transported through all communities, all conditions, by people that aren't necessarily the best trained, and it causes quite a few accidents, injuries, and fatalities. Unfortunately, as with the grain side of things, I'm going to start with an obituary. We've got Richard Shaw, who just by coincidence was the father of the president of Berkeley Ag when I worked there. So I know a lot about this accident. Richard was the patriarch of the family, lots of kids, lots of grandkids, some great grandkids, very active in the community, just a great, outstanding man. And certainly, I know he was 74 years old, but he was still the primary in the farming operation. He farmed with his son Michael, but it was certainly not his time to go. And it's just a tragic accident that happened. I'm going to start by showing a couple of videos. The first one is actually the news coverage of Richard's accident. And then the second one is just a short video showing you what a cloud of anhydrous ammonia looks like on a very calm, humid day. Typically, as all of you that have been around it know, anhydrous ammonia in its gas form is a lot lighter than air, so it usually dissipates very quickly. You see the white vapor kind of dissipating up into the sky, but on a hot, humid day, it will hang to the ground. It will literally just expand like a blob on the ground and engulf, and anything or anybody in the area will be severely impacted by it.
A son risked his life but could not save his father from an anhydrous ammonia leak in southern Iowa Sunday. It happened on a farm near Pilot Mound in Boone County. Investigators say 74-year-old Richard Shaw of Ogden was towing an anhydrous tank to fertilize the field. His son, Michael Shaw, went out to find the tractor in a chemical haze. The son jumped into the tractor, drove it out of the haze, then called for help.
The one individual that had been in the tractor operating it was in pretty bad shape at that point. And you know, obviously the more that you inhale, obviously the worse it gets. And the son that was trying to rescue his father at that point was very close to being totally overcome as well.
The father died at the scene. His son was airlifted to Des Moines Hospital but was released later that day. Investigators say a broken hose caused the
So Richard's accident happened on a Saturday morning, and first thing Sunday morning, some coworkers of mine and I actually went to the farm, to the field where it happened, and kind of retraced Richard's steps. You could literally follow the path and see where Richard lifted the toolbar out of the ground and started making figure eights and circles to get out of the cloud. He basically had a failure in the piping right off the nurse tank, and he had a liquid stream coming out of that pipe and spraying liquid kind of against the back of the certainly the toolbar, and then the cab as well. And you could kind of see also where the wheels for the toolbar were kind of bouncing across the chisel plowing, and you could tell where he sped up, you could tell where he was turning, and he was literally trying to get out of that cloud of ammonia. And this is the site where the tractor stopped, and Michael, his son, after many attempts to get into the cloud and shut the valves off, he was able to get the tank shut off. Michael suffered some pretty significant lung damage from that, and then he did get in the cab and pull the tractor ahead a little ways to get it out of this. But this ground was still frozen roughly 20 hours after the incident occurred. The tractor, toolbar, and nurse tanks were moved to the farmyard, where we were able to kind of look at everything and examine kind of what happened. And in this case, the threads and the piping connection between the Acme valve and the pipe failed. I personally really don't like this setup, because you've got a lot of weight kind of hanging on the threads of the pipe as you bounce through the field, as you hook up and disconnect. And clearly at some point, and I don't think Richard hooked the hose, there was no damage to the hose, but at some point this valve was pulled off this pipe, and I personally think another farmer or someone at the co-op reattached and cross-threaded it and kind of caused this to be a weak point that eventually failed. You can literally see on the valve how far it used to be threaded on, and then you can see the point where it was cross-threaded, and that there were only 3 or 4 threads holding this before it failed. As with most things, there are rules and guidelines to follow when you're putting equipment like this together. And for 2-inch Schedule 80 black iron pipe, which is required for anhydrous ammonia in this situation, you need to be able to hand tighten just over 5 threads and then tighten a total of 12 threads. So clearly this system was not meeting the requirement for anhydrous ammonia, and specifically this application. Some other problems with this setup. This is the hose on the toolbar, and it should have been removed no later than 2004. This is I think braided stainless steel anhydrous hose is a 15-year hose, and this incident happened in 2011. So the hose had been on far past its expiration date. Here's another hose that should have been removed in 2002. Lastly, the breakaway coupler on the toolbar should have been removed in 2008. Nurse tank accidents happen all the time, and when they overturn, the valve situation kind of is such that the vapor valve becomes the liquid valve. The pop-off valves are shooting out liquid, so they can be fairly dangerous. And there too, depending on the weather conditions, you can have a huge cloud that can travel and affect entire communities, block roads for a significant amount of time, and also cause very serious injuries. This was a situation with a farmer pulling 2 tanks on a gravel road too fast and just got a little out of control. Thankfully, as in most of these accidents, it was in a rural area where they could simply be allowed to bleed off. Let's talk about injuries with anhydrous ammonia. Because of the moisture in your eyes, they're particularly susceptible to anhydrous ammonia injuries. The moisture attracts the ammonia, and the caustic nature of the chemical literally just kind of dissolves and destroys tissue, particularly tissue that is moist. With the changes to the nurse tanks, it used to be when we had single thousands and single 1450s, it was more vapor that was released when you were connecting and disconnecting, and I'm not saying the injuries were less severe, but they certainly weren't as deep. It seems like now when we're bottom connecting to the dual 1450s and to the 3000 singles, we are now seeing a little more liquid during that process, and a shot of liquid, while it obviously the vapor is still dangerous, but the liquid is worse. The injuries go deeper and deeper, and this is kind of what we're seeing more of now. Stomach, side, back. This one's kind of somebody's side and back with a very severe burn. So as far as personal protective equipment, obviously, we want your skin covered up as much as possible. You need to have the eye protection, and unfortunately, they can't be ventilated. If they are ventilated, they have to have indirect venting. You can certainly deal with your retailer on the type of goggles you need. Gloves, long sleeve shirt. I would recommend an apron just to prevent this type of injury. At the retailer level, one of the changes OSHA made a few years ago was to require the rubber aprons while they're filling nurse tanks. And I know, when it's hot, it's not very popular, but it certainly is a safeguard that you should take. For the eyes, you have to have safety water available. At the retail level, they have full immersion tanks that they can jump in and rinse off. On the farm, there are the little tanks that are strapped to the nurse tank. Those have to be kept full of clean water. And then I always recommend an extra couple gallons in the cab of the tractor. If you have a rock box on the tractor, put a gallon or so in there, and have a little pocket bottle that you can squirt into your eyes to help with that. And the last thing I'd recommend too, they have temporary breathing, like air supplies with a small little air tank, and the mask you pull over your head is just basically a plastic bag that's connected to that air supply. I would recommend having that in the tractor cab as well if you're applying anhydrous ammonia. So that's kind of all I have for today. If you're ever looking for any more information on farm safety, I've got lots and lots of videos and PowerPoints and things like that. Or if you've got a group of farmers that are getting together, or if you're involved in a retail operation looking for someone to do some safety training, I do volunteer my time to do this kind of thing and give back a little bit to the industry that I'm very, very thankful for being able to be a part of. So again, thanks for your time, and I hope you have a great day.